Wow, it's Friday. We made it to Friday, and we're all still here. Thank you so much for joining me here on today's episode of Stand Up, where my very special guest is the always brilliant David Rothkopf of, well, everything. He's posted in Daily Beast, MSNBC, his Substack, Need to Know, and his podcast, Deep State Network, series of podcasts. So many different places that we can learn from David Rothkopf's brilliant mind, and today is a great conversation. I think you'll love it. We love whenever David joins us, and today definitely no exception. Real quick rundown on yesterday's news. Here are your headlines from yesterday. China has raised tariffs on U.S. imports 125%. So, I mean, we might just have a full-on embargo, it feels like I'm hearing. The Supreme Court sided with a man who the government wrongly deported to El Salvador, so they've demanded a lower court somehow find a way to get him back. Something makes me feel like the El Salvadoran torture people are going to say, yeah, we can't find this guy. I don't know where he went. But hopefully he returns, because nobody took their eyes off that situation. Or this one. A helicopter on a sightseeing tour yesterday crashed in New York City, in the Hudson River, killed the pilot and a family of 5 tourists, including, I think, 3 children. Absolutely horrific. And the second high-profile helicopter crash while Donald Trump is president. You know, you shouldn't blame him. Do you think they'd blame Joe Biden or Barack Obama? The House passed a Republican bill requiring documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, despite non-citizens voting already being illegal and extremely rare. So they passed this law they've been trying to pass forever, in the House at least, and it's completely unnecessary. Isn't that weird? These people who don't like government are creating government regulation where one is unneeded, because they've actually convinced Americans that undocumented people are voting, which they never are. Why would they? It's extremely rare. It's certainly never had the affected the outcome of an election, but yet there they are. Trump ordered federal investigations into 2 former officials who contradicted his false claims about the 2020 election. So if anybody ever thought for one second he wasn't going to use his Department of Justice as a tool of revenge, then obviously you know he was going to. But he said he wasn't, and Pam Bondi in her confirmation hearing said she wouldn't. Anyway, a judge ruled that Newsmax, the right-wing television network, defamed Dominion by airing false 2020 election claims. Now, they won almost $1 billion from Fox. Newsmax can't have that kind of cash, can they? What's going to happen with that? The House passed the Republican budget plan following a conservative standoff that fell apart finally under pressure from guess who? That's right, our orange tyrant. Nearly 2,700-mile Keystone oil pipeline was shut down on Tuesday morning after it ruptured in North Dakota, halting the flow of millions of gallons of crude oil from Canada to refineries in the U.S. and potentially leading to higher gasoline prices. I don't want to tell you I told you so, but we environmentalists told you so. Hopefully it's not as bad as it sounds. Trump himself yesterday lost a bid to dismiss a defamation lawsuit brought by plaintiffs known as the Exonerated Five, formerly the Central Park Five. Thursday's court ruling brings Trump closer to potential civil liability for comments he made about them during a presidential debate against Kamala Harris last year. Doesn't guarantee the plaintiffs will ultimately succeed in the case, but I like reading that yesterday. So those are just some of the headlines that I caught for you here on a Friday morning. And I don't have clips because it's Friday and I am absolutely exhausted, and I still have a lot more to do today, but I do want to get this posted up, this conversation with David Rothkopf. So sorry for the truncated opening. Normally it's headlines and clips, but today I'm just jumping right to my conversation with David. I also have a great conversation with Celeste Headley that I'm going to put up this afternoon, and I'm talking to Christian Finnegan, so I'll air that for Saturdays with Christian. But right now it's time to get to Deep State Radio Network's David Rothkopf. You got to subscribe to his podcast and his Substack, Need to Know. So many good pieces that he's been writing lately. I think that you will get a lot out of them. He's also written, as I mentioned, just yesterday for MSNBC.com and last week for Daily Beast. You can find him everywhere. He's one of the smartest and most in demand. So I'm always happy when I get the opportunity to tape a conversation with him. Let's do it right now with my friend David Rothkopf. And remember, I can't do any of it without you Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Thanks to everybody who joined us, by the way, last night at the Hangout. And okay, now let's do it with Rothkopf. All right, there he is, David Rothkopf, who is a prolific writer. Look at you. I read your Substack, as I always do, and I read this piece about philosophy, enlightenment, and Descartes, however you pronounce that, twice. I read you at the Daily Beast, and now MSNBC has asked you for a piece to talk about NATO, or you submitted. I don't know how things work, but we have a lot to talk about, and I'm loving all of it. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Good. How are you, Pete?
Good. My friend Celeste Headley said she's a Trump okay, which I like as a good way of talking about it. And I'm sure they did this in other civilizations that were living under this kind of authoritarianism. They referred, how are you doing? I'm as good as I can under this tyrant. Is that true?
I suppose that they did. I've never lived under a tyrant before or in a police state. So this is all new to me. But make no mistake about it. That's what's happened.
Yeah, I want you to put it in terms that however you feel comfortable with. You're not known, I don't think, for hyperbole. Where do you think we're at in Orwell's narrative?
Look, I don't think you can deny that we're in a police state, right? The federal government has people who go out there without identification, wearing masks, pick people up in the street, send them out of the country without due process. The Attorney General of the United States, a woman who holds that title but doesn't seem to appreciate what the job really is, says, I hope that these people we sent off to this El Salvadoran prison rot there for the rest of their lives. The President of the United States says, I'd like to send U.S. citizens there, then does things like launching executive orders where he takes people like Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, who are dedicated public servants, both of whom served, by the way, in the Trump administration, who committed the sin in Trump's eyes of telling the truth. And he's now directed the Justice Department to investigate them for what he calls treason, the treason being criticizing him. And right. So all this is police state tactics. You mentioned Orwell, and I saw a thing today where ICE has said that their job is to keep a number of things from going across the border, and they list them: people, weapons, drugs. But the other thing they list on this is ideas. Now it's an image. You shared it at Blue Sky. It's an image from the ICE account that says ICE enforces 400 plus federal laws to ensure public safety and national security. If it crosses the U.S. border illegally, it's our job to stop it. And then the 4 words are people, money, products, ideas. Yeah, ideas. Their job is to stop it. Actually, there's only one idea that I am aware of that's illegal under the United States Constitution, and that is the idea of saying ideas are illegal. You know, this is insanity, and it is supported by the Republican Party. And as recently as today and yesterday, we have Democrats voting to support different initiatives of this administration while they run a police state, while they break down fundamental freedoms, while they blow up the global economy, while they embrace our enemies. Trump today, I just can't even. Today he had a sit down with Pete Hegseth, in which he said, yeah, we're sending troops to Panama and we have ships there and we're going to take it over.
He said we're going to take over Panama today. I did not see that.
Yeah.
Look.
Yeah. And that's where we're going to get it. We're going to get Greenland. On Monday of this week, Trump sat with Netanyahu and said, yeah, no, I want to take over Gaza. I want us to own Gaza, which takes us from the Biden administration supporting war crimes of Israel in Gaza to the Trump administration actually essentially offering to commit war crimes, the war crime of ethnic cleansing on behalf of the Israelis. And in exchange for that, we'll get Gaza and they'll build a casino there. Lunacy, absolute lunacy, but not the funny kind, the malevolent, evil kind.
Yes, a lot of malevolence and evil. You wrote a piece over at your Substack, which I read twice. I mentioned putting, how do you say it? Descartes? Descartes? How about that?
Descartes. It's not a joke. if you can't pronounce it. Because the headline
Descartes
is putting Descartes before the horse. Like putting the cart before the... You see what I was doing there? But if you pronounce it Descartes...
It's too smart for me, for my sense of humor. But the piece itself is also so smart and informative because it takes a look at history, a historical point of view through the Enlightenment era, and looks at what is being done today, vis-a-vis what we're talking about in terms of the police state, but specifically in terms of trying to make us question everything. And you write about one such lesson you write is the importance of doubt, independent thinking, and enlightenment to progress and to truly understand and improve the state of the world. Another is that those who seek to reverse progress, while they argue that they are doing so in defense of better traditional ways of thinking, clearly do not even believe this themselves. Otherwise, they would not always seek to suppress the knowledge, facts, and ways of thinking they know, but the lie to their approaches. There's so much good stuff in this, but I want to ask you about the strategy being undertaken by the Trump administration attacking colleges and universities and saying they cannot have millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding if they do or don't teach certain ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I think there's a broader thing going on here, and I think it's associated to the fact that this is a would-be autocrat, and the only way that he can grab power and maintain it is by lying. And Trump is a pathological liar, as we know, and if your primary selling points for your administration are lies, then the enemy of your administration is the truth. And so what are they doing? They're waging a war on truth and knowledge, and they're doing it across the board. The whole DEI thing, where they're taking books out of libraries and saying people can't teach American history as it really was, is a war on the truth. What they're doing, cutting science funding or putting a guy like RFK Jr. at the head of HHS, is a war on the truth, a war on knowledge, getting rid of the underwriting that researchers need, or and it's stopping big projects. Yesterday, there was a Washington Post story that talked about how we're on the verge of a cancer breakthrough, and it's now on hold because they've stopped funding for it. And these attacks on the universities are an effort, like all authoritarians do, to stop academic discussions of things that they don't like. They use, and I think in a gross and abusive way, the term anti-Semitism to say, oh, yes, no, we're fighting anti-Semitism. That, of course, is hard to swallow from a group that actually has Nazis in it and white supremacists. Quite beyond that, it's not what they're doing. It's like DEI. They have a premise that is allowing them to go in and say, no, don't teach this class or we're going to turn off your funding. Don't teach that class or we're going to turn off your funding. Handle your own student demonstrations the way we want, or we're going to cut off your funding. How long is it before it's don't teach about contraception, or we're going to cut off your funding? Don't teach women are equal to men, or we're going to cut off your funding. Don't tell the truth about the Trump administration. Don't debate the truth about this administration, or we're going to cut off your funding. That's the direction they're heading in. And that's what we should be worried about. And that's going to happen at universities. And by the way, keeping out students from going and attending those universities because they looked in their cell phones, and in their cell phones, they said things that were pro-Palestinian or anti-Trump. That's more of this keeping ideas out of the country stuff. And it's about trying to decide what's on America's mind. What is right think? What is wrong think? And that, to get back to your first point, is Orwell.
Do you think there is such thing as improper ideologies? Because that's the phrase they're using now. I think there's some pretty improper ideologies that should not be.
Do you, Pete? I don't believe you do.
Yeah, specifically at the National Zoo.
That's where he's brought it up, right? That was in the executive order targeting the Smithsonian and the National Zoo. As I have said before elsewhere, what is it they object to? That pandas are both black and white? That maybe they should only be white? At the Smithsonian, I can tell you from talking to people there, they think not only is funding going to be cut back, but that the existence of the Museum of African American Heritage is in jeopardy. They want to tear it down. They want to get rid of it. And this is censorship, authoritarianism, despotism, tyranny. And that's why I keep coming back. It's like anybody who supports anything these guys are doing, going too far. We're at a binary moment in American history. You are either for the tyrant or you are against the tyrant. And if you are sitting on your hands or you're doing nothing, you're for the tyrant because that's what he wants. And we've got to stand up. And he's now saying, by the way, when you stand up against me, there's a chance we're going to come after you. And they're going to now use IRS data to go after, quote, illegal immigrants. But that's just first. Again, this is really existential threat to the country. And it's an existential threat to the world, because if we switch, it's bad for the planet. And most importantly, it's an existential threat to stand up with Pete Dominic. Because if you say stuff that they don't like, they could come in and shut you down.
Let them try. I know how much security we have.
I hope they don't try. When they did an executive order against Miles yesterday, and here is a guy who wrote the anonymous article in which he dared to say that there are a lot of people in the Trump administration who didn't like Trump. I wrote a book on this, a whole book called American Resistance, which I interviewed all those people. And they were trying to stop Trump because they thought he was dangerous. And Trump is now saying, oh, no, saying that kind of thing, that's treason.
He's on a revenge tour for sure. He is doing everything he can. Remember, there was some question whether or not he would use his Department of Justice to go after the people, quote, his enemies, just anybody that criticized him, or people like Miles Davis and Chris Krebs. He's absolutely using the Department of Justice to investigate his enemies, really out in the open. He's not hiding it at all. I think it's but it's just every day. We're the frog in the water, and every day the temperature goes up. So what happened yesterday then? You wrote a piece at your Substack. The markets have the whip hand over Trump. The president again revealed his weakness, but great danger remains. What happened? He blinked? He caved? How do you see that?
He caved to the markets by taking a step back from grotesque, misguided economic policies that would have destroyed the world economy and sent us hurtling into a depression, and instead punted those 90 days. So he hasn't disavowed them. And instead he said, this is what we're going to have. We're going to have 10% tariffs across the board in the interim. We're going to have 20, 30% tariffs in addition on Canadian and Mexican goods of certain size. And we're going to have 145% tariffs on China. Now, as Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, formerly writer for the New York Times, wrote today, look at those tariffs. Those are higher a net impact on our trade than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930, which sent the country hurtling into depression. Furthermore, what he has left in place will not move one company to the United States. It will not move one job to the United States, provoking China, which is the primary or second number 2 purchaser of our treasury bonds, puts his desire to go deeper into the red at risk. He hasn't really thought that through. But even more importantly than that, the global economy for the past 80 years, certainly for all of our lives, has depended on the U.S. to be a bastion of stability, to be the solid foundation on which everything was built, to have the dollar be the solid foundation. Nobody trusts the U.S. anymore. Nobody thinks the U.S. is dependable. Nobody can predict what's going to happen next in the United States. And the loss of trust is the loss of the thing that really was our true superpower in terms of alliances, defense and national security policy, but also in terms of economic policy.
Trust and credibility, meaning you're going to say you're going to do what you say, and that consequences have matter, and that if you made a deal, you're going to follow through. Sometimes I think it's hard for people to understand specifically when that trust breaks with a country versus a person. It's not necessarily the same, but you basically laid out in a piece at MSNBC.com, speaking of which, you are basically saying it's time for NATO to plan a future without U.S. support because we are no longer a dependable ally, you say. And any assessment, you write, of NATO's future before Trump's inauguration is got to be wrong now because the U.S. is no longer a dependable ally of other countries in the alliance it played a central role in building. It has switched sides. The Trump administration is now openly hostile to those allies, actively working to weaken the transatlantic partnership and heavily supportive of the Kremlin and the loose alliance of ethno-nationalist, anti-democratic nations it leads. That is no exaggeration. It really is the deal. And the U.S. is we're attacking our allies like Canada and Denmark and siding and punishing them through tariffs and siding with Russia and getting rid of any agency or oversight of their crimes. And so that is a good example of what the earlier point about credibility and trust matter. And NATO, you're saying, can't trust us anymore. That's quite a thing.
It's huge, but we're saying we're going to attack one NATO ally, Denmark, which controls Greenland, and that we want to annex another NATO ally, Canada, that we have embraced NATO's primary adversary, Russia, that we've turned our back on the principal conflict that is attracting NATO's attention right now, the one in Ukraine, on Ukraine, the country that is defending us, that we are pulling back from our policies of coordination with NATO. It would be unbelievably reckless for European leaders to say, oh, yeah, we can always count on the U.S. Candidly, it'll even be reckless for them to do so after 2028, even if there's a Democrat, because they're not going to know when the next MAGA person may be elected. We have, for the past 25 years, gone from one extreme to another. The unilateralism of Bush to the leading from behind kind of fecklessness of Obama, to the gated community isolationism of Trump, to the traditional internationalism of Biden, and now to Trump as openly being a member of this alliance of ethno-nationalist, anti-democratic, authoritarian states that include Russia, Hungary, Turkey, Israel, India. Argentina is heading in that direction. Brazil was heading in that direction. Serbia. That's our team. That's the team our government is on right now. And it should scare the hell out of everybody because it's not what we all signed up for as we've led our lives. And I can only imagine if you're 23 years old, you're getting out of college and you're thinking, how do I plan out my future when I don't know if this country is going to have a future? Do I do it here? Do I do it someplace else? I don't know. Pete, do you have friends who've said, and I'm thinking maybe I'll move overseas? I do.
I have friends who have. I have friends who have. And your example was to pick someone graduating college, but I think the probably more, that's not an inaccurate example, but a similarly accurate example would be anybody who is doing anything, any business at all, any future plans. Should I buy a car? I went to Costco for the first time since I bought a membership because I'm that guy that they count on to never shop and just pay the membership. And I bought all kinds of things that I thought were going to go up in price. So if you are a business and trying to plan for the future, if you want to go to college and you need financial aid, I'm looking at that with my daughter who's a junior in high school, and she is probably going to do a gap year in Italy just to watch and see what happens because she's got citizenship there. So I think it's an
and you know what?
Accurate.
If she is an EU citizen and she gets sick, she gets free health care. If she is an EU citizen and she gets old, she will get taken care of. If she is an EU citizen and she goes to any other EU country, she'll get those things. She can attend university at an EU rate. And if you're sitting here, you've got to say, I think I need to consider that. I typically will lease my cars. So I heard what he was doing. And I said, I better lease the car now. Well, the lease was up in a couple of months, rather than waiting a couple of months, given the 25% tariff on foreign cars. And I went to the dealership and they said, we think it's going to be like COVID. We think it's going to be dead in here because the price of the cars is going to go up 25%. This is outside DC, where a lot of people have lost their jobs because of cutbacks in the government. And they're buckling down because the 25% matters a lot if you're buying a car. And it's not something that just affects a Mercedes or a BMW or an Audi or a Porsche buyer. It affects a Kia buyer and a Hyundai buyer and a Toyota buyer and a Honda buyer. And lots of U.S. car companies have lots of components that are made overseas. So this is pretty grim at the grassroots level.
Yeah, it's grim at the grassroots level for sure. And I think a lot of people might not be feeling it or seeing it. Have you done anything on your podcast or on your network? Had anybody talking specifically about China? Because when the market rallied yesterday and they, quote, put a pause, which wasn't a pause, and reported that it was, on all these other countries, I was thinking, whoa, like just a trade war with China would seem pretty bad. So just about China alone, just tell me something we might need to know or think about.
Look, China's our number 3 trading partner. That's bad. A lot of people who get products from China are getting things they depend on. iPhone could double in price to $3,000. iPhone could become $3,000. But there are a lot of people who get shoes and clothing, things they buy at Costco or at Walmart from China. They're going to be squeezed by this. This is the most important trading relationship in the world, but it's also the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And if the whole relationship sours because of Trump's crazy trade policies, that's a problem. If China decides, as they have apparently decided to do, to stand up to Trump, which I think is the right policy, by devaluing the Chinese currency, that will offset some of the tariffs, but it's also going to make them much more competitive. If China then goes and uses the nuclear option, where they're the number 2 purchaser of U.S. treasuries, and they say they don't even have to stop buying U.S. treasuries. All they have to do is at some meeting somewhere say, we are considering stopping buying U.S. treasuries. And the United States is going to not be able to borrow at the current rates. The cost of borrowing is going to go up. It's going to go up for the country, but it's going to go up for you and me and the other things that we borrow. And it's all compounded by the fact that a lot of what Trump is doing is to tee up a tax cut for the rich that will actually increase the benefits to the rich, that will increase our deficit by $5 trillion to $9 trillion. And that money has got to come from somewhere. We have to borrow that money. And we have to borrow it in the international market. And the number 2 purchaser of the treasury notes that we use to borrow that money is China. And I think we need to think really long and hard about this as a policy, because our relationship with China, and this is the core point, it's not the simplistic black and white relationship we had with the Soviet Union. It's interdependent. They depend on us. We depend on them. We may not agree on a lot of things, but if we blow them up, it will hurt us. And we've seen it in countless ways. And we are now running an experiment in just how bad this relationship can get.
I was thinking, I know nothing, but I was thinking that China can take pain a lot more than America can take pain. If we are feeling pain, we will get divided and fight each other. We already are. But I feel like China can make sacrifices and take, quote, pain a lot better than we can. Does that theory make any sense?
No, I think it does make sense, because they're not a democracy, right? And they have a strong central government that gets to do what it wants to do. And so they can say, you're going to have pain, live with it. Secondly, a lot of the people in China already live at a pretty deprived level by our own standards. And so I think they can do that for a period of time. There are other things at play here. And if you talk to the Chinese, talk to Chinese people, average Chinese people, not government people, and I do on a pretty regular basis, they'll say, you're insulting us. You're treating us badly. You are trying to bully us. And they have national pride as well. And they're willing to take the pain. rather than to bend the knee.
J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America, called them peasants. And apparently they were surprisingly very offended by that. Beijing calls United States Vice President ignorant over Chinese peasants' remark. China lashes out at J.D. Vance for comments about Chinese peasants. What a careless, dumb thing to do. What an unbelievably...
Look, this is a world-class asshole and completely unqualified for the job he holds. I got to tell you, if the average one of your listeners got up on a plane and flew to Shanghai, flew to a place they've never heard of in the middle of China, they flew to Chengdu, or they flew to any of the many cities in China with 10 million or more people, they would see cities dramatically more modern than any city in America. They would travel on rail systems more modern. They would see more AI. They would see more holograms. They would see more apps. They would see more use of social media. Is China a deeply flawed society? Yes. Is Xi a heavy-handed leader that we can't get behind in terms of his ideas of government? Yes. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is China is super advanced. It's cleaning our clock in some areas of AI. We're leading in some, they're leading in some. But to make a statement like that is moronic.
Yeah. I wonder if they have self-checkout.
That's a great point. I was in China a few years ago with my wife, and we go pretty often. And we were going to a shopping mall, which looks better than any U.S. shopping mall. And I think my wife wanted to buy some, I don't know what it was, mango or some melon or something. And she went, and we walked up to the guy and we said, "Here's some money." And they said, "We don't take money." I said, "What?" I said, "No, everybody pays with their phone." And the WeChat, which is a social media thing, on their phone is attached to their bank account. They go in, they gather the stuff, they walk straight out the door. And the thing tallies it up. I was at a dinner on a different trip talking to a woman whose kid was going to Harvard. And I said, do you enjoy going to visit her? And she said, "No, I don't like going to the United States." And I was like, "Why don't you like going to the United States?" And she said, "You still use money."
It's fascinating.
You want to criticize China? There's plenty to criticize China about: human rights abuses, being too close to Russia, crackdown in Hong Kong, all those things. But China has made more strides as a large society than any other society that we've seen in the history of the world.
And
in the past couple of decades.
But so has Europe, not as much as China, but social mobility and so on. And we're just so stuck. And now it's the last thing I just wanted to bring up is the investing in the future of technology is an interesting conversation to have. But Trump is so anti-environmental ideas and clean energy technology, which is clearly the future, and making billions for companies and countries. And he's talking about coal. We're going to have our lunch eaten by pulling out of markets in many ways through these trade issues, but also by not investing in future technology from EVs to AI, et cetera. It would seem that other countries, especially China, is going to take over while we're trying to rebuild like stagecoaches for people to travel across the interstates on. I don't know, horse-driven.
It's a mix, because I think the Trump administration is actually surrounded by so many AI lords that their policy is probably going to give the AI companies a pretty free hand to grow, and I think they'll probably do just fine. Their energy policy is terrible and regressive, whether it's coal or fossil fuels. So that's another issue entirely, and that's based on corruption. Remember, Trump during the campaign stood in front of a bunch of oil industry execs and say, "Give me $1 billion and I will give you whatever you want." And that's exactly what he's doing. He's also cutting back on a lot of programs to promote EVs, EV charging stations, and so forth, but not doing so in a sensible way. He's doing so in a way that actually benefits his primary benefactor, Elon Musk, because Tesla has its own network, and it doesn't want somebody building a network that works for the other cars out there. It doesn't want the incentives that go to certain other car makers. So there's corruption underlying all of this as well.
Do you think that people are going to stop coming here and we're going to lose billions in tourism because A, they're worried about getting stuck in customs or not getting out of the country or into the country, and B, they're just out of a protest like Canadians and other countries that just are mad at us and they don't want to get
Absolutely. Canadian trips to the U.S. are down. The last I looked, 70 or 80%. European trips to the U.S. were down almost 200,000 the last month that I looked for. Of course they're not coming. Would you come? I was talking to a friend yesterday, who's an Israeli, who is regularly seen in Washington, and he said, I don't know if I want to get on a plane, because if they want to check my phone at customs and they see that I've written some anti-Trump stuff and they go and put me in a holding cell and then send me right back, I don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
And so students aren't going to come. People aren't going to come here and work. Doctors aren't going to come, and a lot of the doctors we use in rural medicine in the United States come from overseas. Scientists aren't going to come here. They used to. They made our laboratory. My father's an immigrant scientist who worked at Bell Telephone Laboratories. It was full of immigrant scientists. The Manhattan Project was driven by immigrant scientists. Silicon Valley was built by immigrant scientists. And why would they come? Why? It's not in their interest to come.
For our parks. Our national parks
which are being shut down and underfunded. And besides, have you been in one recently? There's like a lot of bears and other wild animals.
And people are really ugly. Like I did imagine if there's no one maintaining the parks or they're not maintained very well, it's just going to be like the public restrooms are just going to be covered in hot.
Oh, but they're always pretty terrible to begin with.
Fair.
Let's be honest. You go into the middle of nowhere and you go in, at last, a restroom, and then it's some hole in the ground. You look down and,
wow. I had no idea you had so much antipathy towards our national parks.
I don't like I love the national parks and the beauty and all that. The reason I don't go is that you're supposed to, if there's a black bear, you're supposed to stand up tall and make yourself loud. Yeah. And if it's a grizzly, you're supposed to go in a fetal position. But I'm not 100% sure I'd know the difference. And so what if I make myself loud and it's a grizzly? You see what I'm saying?
I would, if I were with you, I would whisper to the bear about some of your ideologies, and then I would push you in front of the bear and run.
Yeah, of course. That's the old joke, right? And I knew that I could depend on you to always go to the old joke. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to be faster than you.
Yeah. I appreciate you joining me. I always learn a lot reading you, listening to you over at the Deep State Network. And of course, we always love when you join us here. A lot of people want you to be at our next live gathering when we have it. So we're going to have to find a way to get you a chariot.
Well,
bring you.
Are there snacks?
Oh, there's going to be, we will make a bit out of what your demands would be, and we'll have just ridiculous things that you want
just
to eat, and
green peanut M&Ms.
Anything you want. We literally will make a bit out of it. People love you, and they talk about you and a lot, and how much they love when you join us. So yeah, we'll meet any requests that you have within reason for your rider, for sure. Yeah.
My rider.
Yeah, we're going to make up a rider for you.
Yeah, make up a rider. My daughters live in Brooklyn, so any chance I would have to get anywhere near there is something I would jump at.
All right, so we'll have it near their place to get there. Or maybe we'll just invite them. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. David Rothkopf, the one and only. Need to know.substack.com. And go subscribe over and support the Deep State Radio Network. His series of podcasts is really great and valuable. Love talking to him. Hopefully you appreciated it. I'll have Celeste Headley coming up later on, and I've got Christian Finnegan joining me later. I'll post that, I think, for Saturday. So looking forward to both of those. Also, for you bumblebees here at the end, we did announce at the Hangout last night that September 5th through 7th, we'll do a get-together, a stand-up get-together. It's Farm Jam at Kevin Richberg's farm in upstate New York, the closest airport being Syracuse, Marcellus, New York, to be specific. Slate Hill Edible Forest is where it's all going to go down. We'll talk more about what's going to happen, but if you are listening now and you have any interest in hanging out with us in early September 5th through 7th, it'll be beautiful in upstate New York. Might even be really hot. It's very possible. And either way, I hope that you'll consider coming and joining us. We'll let you know exactly what's going to happen at Farm Jam, but you can definitely bring a tent and camp out. So you can stay for free if you like sleeping outside in a tent. I know many of you like a little more posh setting than that, but if you're still listening and you're interested, I thought I'd just mention it here at the end because I forgot to mention it at the beginning, which I'll do on the next episode of Stand Up, which I can't do without you. Thanks so much. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can always think about upgrading your monthly payment. That's great. Keep us going here. And I said that at the very end, so probably didn't make much sense. John Carroll taking us out. To all you bumblebees still listening, love you guys the most.